Thank you once again all for being with us today. I think we've got some great stuff out of it. We enter the final part of the day. We have a group of experts with us for what we hope will be a very lively, interactive panel discussion. Please get involved, ask them some difficult questions. So I'm trying to spot where they are. I think they're hiding around the corner. Firstly, we have Dirk Mölter, who's the Sustainability and Technical Director for Goodman Continental Europe, who are an integrated commercial property group that owns, develops and manages commercial real estate. Joins us from Germany. Dirk, thanks for joining us. Clemens Kanonier is a trained architect who works for the Department of Building Construction and Building Management at the state government of Vorarlberg in Austria. Pleased that you're here with us today, Clemens. Dirk is Head of Corporate Responsibility at REDEVCO, a leading retail investor in Europe and joining us from the Netherlands. Thanks, Dirk. And Anna, we've made you do so much work today, it doesn't finish here, who you've been introduced to. So, we had a call, and we talked about some questions we were going to lead with, and I will start with those to the panel, but then a lot of new things have come up during today, so we're going to be pretty flexible and take your questions as well. So, I want very specific thoughts on this question. We heard building upon what's already been done. The communication says it. But in the process ahead to design this EU framework of core indicators, how can we ensure that we are building upon what's already there, helping achieve this common language and alignment? What does that process need to look like? Dirk, I'm going to go to you first of all, if I may.
Does it work? Yeah, okay. I think, from my point of view, it should not be a process on top of a lot of processes from practical point of view. So it needs to be integrated in the reporting which is already there, or let's say it in a different way. If there is a rollout of this process, from my point of view, it needs to be the starting point or a platform, foundation, which gives all involved parties, a possibility to go for their selected rating scheme or solution they want to do within their company. Great, from practical point of view.
Great, a very practical answer, thank you. Dirk, really?
I think indeed aligning with the existing systems is quite important, because otherwise you would maybe prevent companies who are already on a journey to green their portfolio and make it more difficult, because then you have to switch and collect maybe different data again. The other thing, what's also important, in the end there are so many different initiatives across Europe that we have to collect a lot of data. In the end, it's important to know what kind of information do you really require from property owners. And if we can store that information in a certain common system, which is fine, and then all the different rating schemes and even the European framework can use that kind of information according to their own methodology and their own weightings they apply to that kind of data. Because to date, I think many property owners have to report to all kind of different organizations, which is quite laborious. And maybe we should try to find a way that we can reuse a certain way of information for different purposes. Because at the moment we spend a lot of time on collecting data, and then we only talk maybe about energy data or water data, but it takes us about 1 year to produce an annual report for a portfolio of 450 properties. Next year, September, we will publish the report, but we have already started to think about the whole process. Weekly by week, all activities are scheduled. So it's quite laborious to collect all kind of information, and that's also, you have to be aware of that when developing a certain framework.
So building on some of the existing tools, aligning some of the data requirements, I think that's...
That will help, because when information is already there for certain purposes, you can reuse the same information then for different purposes.
Okay, thank you, Dirk. And I want to ask the question to you, Clemens, just to tell us a little bit about what are your indicators in the public sector, and talking about aligning with things that public sector leaders are doing, how this framework could be useful to you. So what you're doing and how it could be useful building upon what you're doing.
First of all, say thanks for the invitation here to speak. Yes, we in Vorarlberg we already have and use another tool, one of the 600, but this tool was developed within a European program called Enerbuild, and is very similar to another European not tool but program who developed the CESPA generic tool. It's very similar, and there are some core indicators. The one is obvious, is energy. It's clear, and first of all, I have to name this tool. This tool is called the municipal building pass, and yes, the first one I already mentioned is the core indicator is energy. The second one is comfort and health. The third one is sorry. The third one we use is the building. We look at the building products and the construction, the embodied energies, and yes, and we have a fourth, and it's maybe in this situation on this table it's not so interesting, but I mention it because we are also interested in total quality management and also look very much on the planning and the process, and so we have a core indicator which is regarded to the planning and planning process, the quality of the planning process. For us it's very important to ensure that we have a big quality. Yes.
I think that's an important point. It's not maybe just the indicators, it's actually how you get to maybe the results that they're pointing towards. So that's a useful point. And then I kind of want to talk about, this is talking about building on what we've already got and how we actually do that. And that's going to be a difficult process, trying to bring these things together, get transparency on that, look at how we progress towards greater alignment. One relationship that we've mentioned a few times today is the landlord and tenant relationship, which maybe isn't always in alignment and is quite a difficult one, particularly in terms of data gathering. We've discussed this. Just your thoughts on actually some of the ways we might tackle that and how this could be useful in that.
Oh, yes. I think that the green leases could actually be a useful tool. We started to use green leases 4 years ago. That's the first company in Sweden. And since then, I think we've signed about 1,000 green leases. And when we are now certifying our existing buildings according to the LEED scheme, we found out that it's actually, it's good for the environment and it's good for so many things, but it's also good because in the lease agreement we have a section where we talk about sharing data. And since in many of our buildings the tenant electricity is not supplied by us, but they can choose any supplier. And since LEED is covering whole building energy, we really need that data to get our building certified. So, it could be like it could be very difficult because the tenants want to be in a certified building, but they don't want to share the data. But now, since we have the green lease agreement, we can really force them if they don't want to, or at least we can explain it better. So I think it could be a very useful tool to actually reduce the resources that are spent in the building. But I think also maybe we should, because we discussed this earlier on the phone, and we were kind of stuck on the topic getting the data. And it's so difficult, and it's the tenant that is using the energy, and how can we get that data? Mm-hmm. But maybe I think all this energy and resource efficiency discussion that we're having, should maybe we should maybe considering changing our business models, actually, because that has happened in so many other sectors in terms of raised awareness about sustainability, I mean circular economy, sharing economy, etc. I think maybe it's time for the real estate business to really think about our business models.
Okay, and I'm going to, coming from that reflection, come to, I know we've spoken about the landlord-tenant difficulties many a time, and actually how you overcome them. So specifically in terms of, I mean, green leases, I think is a good idea, but how this framework might move us on. Might there be requirements for tenants on data production? Dirk?
Yes, yeah, the tenant-landlord relationship is, I think, one of the key issues or challenges actually we face. We have introduced green leases in 2009 for the first time in the Netherlands. And what we also see, because we collect on an annual basis a lot of energy data from our tenants and water data, and what we see is that even when they have signed a green lease, not everyone is even willing to share then their data. So having a green lease signed is one, and then adhering to it is the second challenge. And what we also face, because you have to recognize it in retail, that's also when I started in my job 7 years ago, I had to realize that in retail, the HVAC systems, the lighting, and all these things related to energy use are more or less owned by the tenant. So we only own the core and shell of a property, and we have no influence on, or limited influence on what kind of installations they install in the properties. That's also a challenge. And we have to be honest that when we have the opportunity to rent out a property to a famous fashion retailer, and they don't want to sign a green lease, yeah, we are not the person who would say, okay, then you won't get into our property. We have to be honest about it as well. But what we try to do is to establish a relationship with them. After 7 years of collecting data, 2 years ago we've started to give something back to the tenant. So now we provide the tenant with their energy consumption data, water data, and compare their consumption with their peers. Because we think that will really challenge them to improve. And we have now, we talked to one retailer, and I think we can really secure some cost savings for them. And because only then you make them aware that they can really reduce their energy consumption or other things. But we provide them their tool, but we are dependent on their data. And to date, 77% by lettable area, we have data available, and the remaining 25% or 23%, it's really a big challenge for us to get that data. So if you have a framework, is one, but to ensure that you have input or data to calculate the KPIs you have introduced in your framework, that will be still a challenge.
So imagine for a second a world where everyone is required to report data under this framework. So there's data on everything, total data transparency. A very difficult and unfair question, Dirk, but I'm going to put it to you. How is this data held? How is it managed? How would you as a company want to kind of interact with this?
That's of course a difficult question. I think if you are talking about data collection, you have to collect the data in a way that you can use it. That would mean if you have a lot of properties, and we have above 100, I think 140 properties within Europe. A few of them multi-tenant. If you collect all the data, that for energy consumption, I think that should be the case. But if there are a lot of other data, and then you discuss, are we doing it monthly because there are some weather conditions or whatever which have an influence, and we get a better view. It's a question how deep you will go to analyze these kind of things. Finally, what are you doing? You're only collecting data, and you need a lot of resources let's say, to get a conclusion out of it. And I think that's very important. that the data collection is only the starting point to give companies the possibility to take some management decisions. So I think that is very key. If we're talking only data collection without any impact, without any to-dos at the end, I think is useless time. Of course, you have a little bit of knowledge, but there need to be the next step, whether it's an improvement of facilities or the decision to buy or sell from different point of views, or to rent or not rent a building. I think that is important as well, that data collection and allocated to a decision at the end.
Mm-hmm. So Dirk, do you want to come in?
Yeah, maybe if I can add to that, what's also important, having the data available is one, but an action plan in place is also important, because we're now in the process of certifying a complete portfolio with BREEAM in use, which is not a one-off action, but we will do that on an annual basis. Every year all the properties will be certified as of 2016. But every property should have an action plan. We want to have an action plan in place, and we want to know what does it cost us or the tenant to improve the property with at least one step. That means from acceptable to pass, or from pass to good, because then you understand and you try to collect data to establish a business case. Mm-hmm. You need to understand what are the costs associated with improving the environmental performance as well. So you need to find the linkage between the financial data and the environmental data in the end as well.
So we've got, I guess there's a big question on how data gathering is working, where's it going to, but there's no point just having loads of data, it's how you use it. And I guess, we've got a lot of companies in the room who've figured out how to use it or are on that journey already. I guess a question or a point to the audience and the panel is, how are we helping guide people on how they use this data that we're looking to collect? Do one of the panelists want to pick that up before I start picking on people in the audience? No?
The question is how to use the data.
And
to give you one example, what we did in the last year's annual report, because we have data available at tenant level. Per tenant we know what their energy consumption is, we know what they pay for rent. So our research department conducted research, and we wanted to understand, is there a correlation between the energy intensity and the rent levels they pay. And it was quite an interesting result. We have to be careful in drawing conclusions always, but what we expect is that the share of energy costs as a percentage of the rent level can have an influence whether there's a positive correlation or a negative correlation. So what we see for the high street retail properties where the rent levels are quite high, there's a positive correlation between the rent levels and energy intensity, which is negative for the business case. On the other side, for the retail parks, we see that there's a negative correlation, which means that the higher the rent, the lower the energy intensity, even corrected for all kind of location factors, etc. So when you have data available, then it can become very interesting to establish the business case and see how you can improve the portfolio cost effectively as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting, I'll bring you in, Dirk, but if we're creating a framework, if we're asking people who aren't collecting data to collect it, I know it's within the communication and certainly within the thinking that there might be guidance on how they are utilizing that data. And I think we have a wealth of experience on what kind of things have been useful and what hasn't maybe been useful in that sphere that can be captured as guidance to those who are just starting on this journey. Dirk?
Maybe one last word about data collection. A few years ago, the data were not available, and we thought, how can we identify which of our properties can be improved? From let's say we identified 2 areas, heating and lighting systems. So we are talking about logistic properties, and we didn't have the data. And on one hand, and on the second thing was the information we wanted to give back to the property management team should be so easy that they understand and that they are able to check or even give us some feedback where we have this potential of improvements. And what we have done, we haven't collected the data. We have sent them around and asked the question, what kind of system is installed? The T5 system, T8 system, or 400 watt spots. And with this information and the knowledge behind, it was also easy for, let's say, for the first step to identify buildings with some improvements or possible for improvements without any data.
And I think it's a very rich area for discussion, the kind of governance and how data collection is going to work under this. I'm going to come to our audience to raise points of their own and questions, particularly difficult questions. This session is about really looking at the way forward from here. Some of the issues we're going to have to overcome. I'm going to come over here, if you could bring the microphone to the gentleman.
My proposition is maybe we should really, maybe first few months or whatever, it should be important that we identify what we mean by environmental efficiency. Now we know what is energy efficiency, and if we want to go and develop a framework, then we have to define what we mean by environmental efficiency. Once we understand this and have the joint understanding, then we might go below and think, okay, what indicators we want to see, and then what data you need in order to implement these indicators. So this is my proposition. And then the framework, which might be interesting, absolutely, it have to include the importance, I think, on the scale, on the context of the project, on the life cycle, and maybe some other issues. So this is just my thinking and proposition. Thank you.
And I realize you had a question as well, so I might put that back to Josefina and her colleagues in a second. There was another point over here, and then I'm going to bring some of these points back to the panelists.
Coming back to the question, what data should be collected and how can we measure? I think one of the most important things is to find a connection between theoretical calculation and practical use. So the calculations we do for the building must be reliable, and then you can measure and you will find the fault if you are too high or too low or something like that. That's a problem. I think the collected data must be connected to the calculation of the building performance. The first point. The second point, I want to emphasize it once more. The business case, in my experience, lead much too often into a situation that the investor, the user, says, don't bother me, you're talking about 1% of my costs. But it is an important issue beside the business case. So there are costs which we can't see on the level of the business case. They are thinking, the investor is thinking, there are public costs, external costs, and we have to put them in, and they can't see that at the moment. So the business case, I have a little bit of a problem just focusing in energy optimization just on the money the enterprises spend on. It's much too little money we are talking about. Energy is too cheap.
Thank you. I want to pick up on the first point, which was what are the next steps? And I think that's pretty key here. Where next? This 2.5 years, more or less, to design this thing. Josefina, I'm going to pick on you in terms of what are your thinking around the next steps, but then I'm going to pick on each of you guys and some of you indeed. What are the really key things we need to do now going forward as this process starts? So Josefina, I'm going to bring you in to provide a view from the Commission.
As Manfred mentioned in the morning when he presented, he laid out the broad lines of how we are going to go on, to start from here now. The idea is that we will start this work more intensively in January. He also mentioned that we will do this by looking at both top-down and bottom-up. What do we mean with that? Well, it's really that for us it is important that whatever we are coming up with, it should have a meaning in the sense of environmental performance on some higher level. So we will need to see what are really our sort of macro objectives, environmentally and resource speaking, and then where we think that buildings actually can play a role. And then again, of course, the bottom-up is to see what is possible on the building level, which we can expect reporting on or measuring and reporting on, which matches those top-down identified areas, so to say. Also, as Manfred mentioned, it will be a great task to look at what has been done out there and what is being done out there, because as many of you say, we have no intention to repeat job which has already been done, and a lot of information is of course out there. So we thought that we had quite a good view of different initiatives going on, but as the day goes on, I realized that there's more that we should be aware of. Yeah? We will, as probably was said in the morning as well, we will set up different kinds of groups for this purpose, which we hope will support us. So some fewer, smaller targeted groups with different kinds of stakeholders, which we intend to use quite intensively, at least in the beginning, well, throughout the process, but certainly in the beginning. But we will also have bigger groups, of course, different groups where we will consult more widely when we have something more concrete to present or draft things to present. Exactly how this, I mean, I can't provide you with a timeline right now. We have something provisional, of course, in-house, which we are working with and fine-tuning, but it's not ready to be presented yet. But otherwise, I should say that, for example, in terms of those smaller targeted groups that I was talking about, it is our intention to come with a call for interest, so that people can let us know if they are interested, if they feel that they have the time to dedicate to this, because that's one thing, and of course obviously the knowledge as well to support us in this work, and we will build it from there. But I think that's more or less what I can say at this stage. It may sound very loose, but we hope in a month or two that we should be able to be more concrete in terms of timing and the different steps more precisely. And
I heard sort of two sub-requests, which was, if you're interested in volunteering for one of these groups, your free time, great. And also, we mapped many initiatives today, but there are many more, and it will be those in the market, the need to provide transparency on what they're working with. So that is a key, I think, next step going forward. Thank you. Manfred, I realized that you stepped in and clearly wanted to add to that.
Yeah, maybe two things. For us, as I said before, it was really, this sector is a little bit the blind spots. So we have learned a lot today. And at the university, when I was still young and innocent, there was a nice sign on the Institute of Sociology. We have tried to answer all your questions. We didn't manage to answer all your questions. Actually, we have more questions than before. And we are as confused as before, but at a higher level and about more important things. And this is more or less the stage that we have reached right now. We got a lot of more of input from your side here, which we have to assess much more. We will come back to you. As Josefina said, we can't give you a precise date, but it will be early next year, definitely somewhere where we need more input. But I have also some homework, practically. It's easy for me to pass work on to somebody else. But we were talking here about, now in general, framework of data collection, data quality, etc., etc. How much data do we need? But the important thing is, what do you want to know? What do you need to know? It was already raised in a few cases here. There are also some projects already where more of this is available. But this is now the important information that we also need. What is the information that you consider as important? prepare this. You don't have to send now everybody an email to us as such, no? But please keep this in mind. This is a very important question in the end. If we want to report, what should be reported? And keep this in mind that we are coming back with this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Manfred. And can I come to Miles, and then I'm going to ask that difficult question, what is that key next step for each of our panelists?
It strikes me, and I was having a conversation with a few people during the break, that we would be well advised to do this in a very coordinated manner. I've found today hugely helpful and informative and very pleasing that the demand side is part of, or some people call it the dark side, but the demand side is part of this process. And for a long time working on particularly the demand side, I think we have felt one step or more removed from the process for the development of frameworks like this. So in coming to how we try to gather the information which comes from the demand side and the supply side, from designers, from product manufacturers, from investors, from building owners, that's a very eclectic mix of people. I think there is a set of organisations around the EU who are very well placed to gather that information, and I would suggest that the Green Building Councils in each of the countries within the Union have a particular role to play here, because they are a natural home for building owners and for suppliers, product manufacturers, designers and others who all need to feed into this process. If we feed in individually from, say, the demand side without going through some of our thinking with other people from the industry, say from the supply side, we will end up feeding in piecemeal bits of advice which will certainly not help the process to go as smoothly or as quickly as it would. So it's a plea really for us to think about how we go back to our home countries and how we coordinate ourselves to try to help this work to gather real momentum in a coordinated way.
So I'm going to start with Anna, but a reflection from each of you on what you think are some of those key things we need to bear in mind. Structured collection of data from the field on what's already happening, initiatives that are already out there. Anna, for you, a key next step to move things forwards?
Actually, I don't know. There are so many steps that needs.
You can have more than one.
I think that we really need to find the most important indicators when it comes to resource efficiency. And I also think, even if I'm a big fan of social responsibility and taking care of human resources, I think maybe in this framework we should actually put the human experience on the side, because maybe that's another framework, I think, and actually focus on resource efficiency from a strict environmental or planetary point of view. At least I think that discussion should be made very early in the phase of putting out the framework. And it's not because it's not important with human experience, but it's because collecting data about that is more difficult, I think, than the natural resource efficiency, because that is more easily measured in tons or liters or anything, I think. So.
Okay, so we've heard that theme of productivity and human performance
Yes.
cropping up, and you think it's a step, but maybe not one of the next ones. Mm-hmm. It's maybe for something in the future.
And it's really important, I want to stress that out, but maybe it will complicate the development of this framework.
So selecting the indicators are obviously a core next step, and the trade-offs if you're selecting a single group, not easy, so that will be a challenge, certainly.
Yes.
And I'm interested, coming to Clemens, for you, kind of being on this panel, the voice of the public sector. For you, what would you like to see as, a key next step, and indeed maybe something that the public sector could be helping with as a next step in this process?
Okay. Here on this table, I think I'm just representing the bottom-up section, and so I don't really dare to make the top-down section to great recommendations, but I have some other words for you. I think we try to take model function in Vorarlberg, our region, for our citizens and also the customers to reach green buildings. And I also think our region can be one of other regions in Europe can take a model function. And so I invite you, come and look how we do it. We are just doing it, and it works.
Very good. So learning from one another. Yes. Actually, that's an invitation for anyone who'd like a nice holiday to go and see some green buildings. So thank you, Dirk.
I think, on one hand you have the KPIs, which is fine, what I already said in my first comment, but what I would like to have is clarity on what kind of information do we need to collect as property owners, so that we ensure that there's a certain consistency of information we need to store on our properties. If that's clear, fine, then we can share that information in a certain database and all different actors can use their own methodologies. But if there's clarity on what kind of information do we need to collect and need to have available, if that's really standardized or harmonized at least, then that would really help. To give you an example, in Alexanderplatz, we developed a new property which is double certified with DGNB and BREEAM. There you see that certain criteria, although many are more or less similar, the input differs. You need to have maybe a different study for a certain criteria than for the other one. So if there's consistency on what kind of information do we need to have available, what are the criteria for a certain study, then we can ensure that that information is available. And then the next step is that you can start to calculate. And with respect to the KPIs, it's important to, that's also how we start with our reporting process, is to conduct a materiality assessment. We only include in our report those aspects that are material to us and to our stakeholders. To give you one example, we do not report on waste, simply because for us it's not a material issue which we can influence, which sounds strange, but we cannot influence our tenants on waste. We have no influence. If you rent a property, if you rent a property, let's assume that your property owner would ask you, okay, how much garbage did you deliver this week to the landfill, which is a strange question. We would not ask that to our tenants, so we cannot influence it. It must be clear what kind of issues are really material for a certain property, and that may differ in different locations across Europe. So in Spain, probably water can be a more important issue than in the Netherlands, which is obvious.
Okay, so I think that leads on nicely from this point about selecting what our indicators are, and then actually the documentation requirements getting clear around the process as well. That's a very useful point. I want to move on to Dirk Mölter.
Yeah, if I would ask me about the next step, I would definitely define the person or the organization responsible for the whole process. I think here I'm in line with Miles. That's let's say the Green Building Council with its local councils. But there's, let's say, one comment on top of that. It should not be a game which certification scheme, rating scheme should be the leading scheme in that whole process. So it should be managed and organized in a neutral way without the reflection of a rating scheme. The next step then would be, from my point of view, the definition of stakeholder groups, because with the input from today, I think we had some great discussions. Let's say you will have a better view on the groups impacted and interested in this process. And then if you do some workshops within the stakeholder groups, you will get the result which KPIs are really important for those groups. With these results, you can combine the results and get a good view on the importance of each of these groups, or which KPIs are important for a group, and that it will be a regional division or a regional distribution differences, or a difference between building types, because residential is different to hotel and hotel is different to office, is for me is also clear. But that needs to be reflected in the definition of the stakeholder groups.
I think that's an important point. Actually, we said in one of the start of our sections, any solutions, next steps will be very sector-specific, actor-specific, and that needs to be mapped out. Has it already been mapped out? Obviously not in respect of an EU framework of core indicators for assessment, but this is the kind of thing that's sort of been done in terms of mapping stakeholders. Is there anyone aware of anything that could be used for this purpose? I was hoping a hand would go up so that we could just... Yes, Anna?
I think I would like to comment on Dirk's waste. Dirk. Sorry. No, Dirk. Derk. I don't know how to pronounce it. You brought up the waste topic, and it might be difficult, and you feel that it's not relevant for you as an environmental topic because you cannot affect it as a landlord. Yes. And actually, that was what I heard 10 years ago about energy. But it's actually the tenant that is using the energy. What could we as a landlord potentially do to that? So I think, because I do think waste is an important topic for a landlord, no matter if it's retail or offices or residential. Because as a landlord, you are the one who can provide them with both premises and also facilities in your property to recycle and sort your waste. And therefore, it's important that the landlord actually both collect data and try to enhance the waste treatment in the property, or the way you're dealing with waste. And back to my business model question, maybe it's time for us property owners to get in front of the car and to the driver's seat instead of sitting in the back seat of our kind of management of the properties. Because I think we tend to give the tenants too much influence on the operating of the buildings, actually. Because I think, what if we would have lease agreements with waste treatment and energy included? Would that have an effect on the overall energy consumption in the built environment, or wouldn't it?
New business models and owner empowerment.
That's the way of putting it, but I think maybe sometimes we're a bit too kind of, we back off from the problem or the issue and say, no, this is a tenant issue and we shouldn't be dealing with it, or we shouldn't be bothering them. But who knows most about building and energy consumption in general? Landlords or tenants?
I want to come back to Dirk Velling for a response on that.
And another reason about waste, sorry, I won't give this away now.
One quick one, and then he gets to respond, okay? One quick one.
Because at least our experience, if we collect the waste, not force, but encourage our tenants to sorted in a very good way, we can actually make money from it. Instead of being a cost, we can make money of it. And every single tenant might not be able to do that because they won't get to the amount of waste where it's possible to get paid because it's too little. But we as a landlord can do it on a bigger scale. So there is actually also business improvements, I think.
Dirk.
There you really see the differences between sectors in the real estate industry.
But we do retail as well.
Yeah, but then probably as well with respect to jurisdictions, we own high street properties. Yeah, you have to think about maybe property at Champs-Élysées, Oxford Street, which are rented out to one tenant, and H&M, Zara, C&A, mention all those big names. Who are we? When we rent out 20 stores to, or 25 to H&M, who are we? To name a Swedish company. Who are we to tell them who run more than 2,000 stores across Europe? You have to separate waste. We cannot influence what kind of products they sell or how they pack their products in their stores. We cannot influence it. Where in terms of energy, we do have a responsibility. And there I've never agreed with our peers that is that we do not collect data from our tenants. Where we said, no, we have a shared responsibility because we own the shell of a property. And that influences the energy consumption. So there we have a shared responsibility. With respect to waste, we have no responsibility. To give you a practical example, in Amsterdam, I rented an apartment at the canal. Every week I drop all my waste at the street. And with REDEVCO we had an event that we also visited the Amsterdam Energy the utility company. But I found out that all my waste was just burnt. There was also no facility to separate waste at the canal where I lived. There's no possibility. What could my landlord do to help me to separate my waste? I'm happy, but what can I do? What could the landlord do? So what can we as a property owner do to influence our tenants in this case? For shopping centers, it's different. For shopping centers, you can have a waste compactor and all those kind of facilities, and there it's included in the service charges, etc. But for a retail high street property we own, we cannot influence it. So it's also the reason why we would not participate in all kinds of benchmarks, because we will never report on waste. And so get a lower performance rating because we have no data available on waste. Because we haven't anything. And if we would be very strict and we would only restrict to, let's say, the scope 1 and 2 emissions, I would only report 5% of all the carbon emissions in our portfolio. Because 95% of the carbon emissions in our portfolio is scope 3. And should we report on that? Yeah, we do. But we are, I think, among the few who really take that serious. And I would encourage that more companies would do that. And there you see that many companies sign green leases, and then they have a lot of green leases, and you ask them, do you collect data? No.
And I think this is a key, we've mentioned this as a key area in the energy space. It's clear it will be an issue going forward, and definitely one that needs some serious exploration and attention. I just want to come to your question. The gentleman just over here on the second row.
Ian Vanderpoel, again representing the facility managers in Europe. I've never seen a building generate waste. Nor have I seen a building using energy. It's the people in it and the processes in it. If you've got two similar buildings and one is a huge server space, you will have more energy. If you talk about efficiency here, you have to make it relative to what's happening in the building. Hence, I would say the productivity of what's happening in the building and how the people are working there is very important to judge the efficiency of everything you use in the building. You can make the most resource efficient building, if it's not being used, is a waste of time and money. And I agree on the part, it's difficult to influence waste, because if you want to reduce the amount of waste, you have to reduce the stream down the value stream already. So if you buy differently, you can reduce the outcome. You don't have to separate.
Thank you. That's a very pertinent point. Anna, did you want to?
It's also which definition you have for waste. Because if you sort out disposable that you don't need anymore and put them into new, what do you say, sorry, I can't find the word. If you use them again or reuse it somehow, maybe it would not be regarded as waste anymore. And I think landlords actually can improve that work. But I do agree, it's not the actual building that is producing that waste. And it has a lot to do about what kind of tenants you have and what kind of business they run. But if you don't care and don't collect the data, maybe nothing will be done. I just wanted to mention. But I do think it's important to think about how the buildings are being used, because if you are talking about efficiency, that's a really important topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to ask one last question, which is, does anybody, now is really your chance as the audience and indeed our panel, to say what you think are key next steps for this process, because when we leave this room, we're on the edge of this process formally beginning, these 2 to 3 years to try to design this thing, make it work, to overcome some of the issues that we've heard today, to work for the different actors in this room and the many other actors in the property sector who aren't specifically part of today's conversations. So I'm going to go to the audience. It's your speak now or forever hold your peace moment. Yes, the gentleman over here, then just behind, and Miles.
I think it's very, very important to focus on the building-related aspects of energy consumption and energy demand, and divide it to the usage. So one aspect the developer can steer, the other he can't. And also with the waste. We also have waste related to the building at the beginning process, and of course in refurbishment and at the end of the building. So waste is important, maybe not in that aspect you mentioned over the process. I think, like you said, there is a tenant, you can't tell them what they have to do, but you are responsible for the materials at the beginning, in the building process, and at the end of the life of the building. So waste is an important thing, I think. And the next step should be, what are the key issues building related? And then divide it, what is the tenant and the user, these aspects. I think it will help us through the next step. Just focus on each.
Thank you. Thank you. And the gentleman just behind.
Yes, hello. I'm also from the Netherlands, and we have this database on resource efficiency for the materials. And we really would like to cooperate with a couple of countries to try to get this throughout Europe. And one of the things, the next step is not just talking about all this new communications and directives, but also start doing something. Because there is a lot of activity in the market, and also even in local communities are doing it without us knowing. And I think it's important that we start doing it also on a practical level. Instead of making it all perfect, just start doing it. And well, I don't know how to organize it, that's our problem, because we cannot take a lead for some kind of process of 5, 6 countries. But we really would like to take, well, if there would be an initiative, we would participate certainly.
So that's an offer there, a proposed solution to start moving on some of this from the government of the Netherlands. Thank you. And coming just behind, Miles, did you?
Anna, I think you suggested that we should ignore productivity, which strikes me as wrong, and it would enable us to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. It strikes me that if we ignore what the occupier really wants from a building, in other words, that they have health and well-being within that building, or the building facilitates them to have that, then we are required in some way, in order to provide some benchmarking system, to capture that information and to use that. If we ignore this in this framework approach, I think we will be treating buildings as if humans don't matter, which I'm sure you don't feel. But if we ignore the human dimension from this, we'll be making a very grave mistake. And I would encourage us to continue with that. You would also be marginalizing the occupier and also leading to a certain amount of disinterest, I would argue, from the money, the investor.
Philippa.
Thank you. As someone who's just spent the summer crunching lots of lovely data, just a word of caution. I would be very careful about only, I'm not suggesting that identifying the key indicators is not important, but often very interesting and very important facts come out of data in the most unexpected ways. And I would certainly encourage a platform that allows people to put in whichever data they have, certainly perhaps as additional or alongside the core metrics that are required. But I think you'd be cutting off perhaps a whole minefield of stuff that may be secondary, but that may show correlations that some of us knew about, none of us knew about. So just a word of warning about just collecting 5 bits of data if people have 15 to offer.
I think that's a very useful word of caution there, and a practical issue in terms of how that kind of process you've just suggested gets managed, but a very, very important point. Thank you.
I think there's some great case studies out there, particularly if you look at the European listed market. If you look at the data that Pete Eichholtz presented a little bit earlier, and you look at how Europe is positioned with regard to the other regions, it just lags behind Australia, for example. But if you break out the European market and you look at, unlisted companies and listed companies are by far the leaders, I would say, in Europe. So you've got some really good case studies to look at, to where you can go, I think, with this thing, and how they've kind of developed, I would say, over the last 5 or 6 years, with regards to the sustainability initiatives.
Great, thank you. Anna.
It is really, really important that we care for human beings and what our occupiers want from the building, and that they get the ability to well-being, health, safety, and all other very important topics related to the human being. But at least when I read the communication, this framework, at least that's how I've read it, it's about environmental, saving natural resources. Maybe it was translated wrong into Swedish, I don't know, but so that's, and I think it's important maybe to focus on some or find the most important indicators in terms of that. And maybe at least in the beginning skip the indicators related to how people feel, because that's so difficult. I mean, how would you measure how people will feel in this building from now and until 25 years in the future?
I'm going to go back to Miles. I know I said I wouldn't, but this debate rages in Brussels about what you include and what you don't include, and it is also important. But it sounded like you had an answer, Miles.
I could go on for a very long time, but I know everyone has to rush.
It has to be very short now.
So I won't. There are very easy ways to collect the information. Rather like you said 10 years ago, people found it difficult to talk about energy use in buildings and to collect the data. We can collect the data on human performance in buildings, and we can develop benchmarks, as many organisations have and are continuing to do, rather like we can with energy or with waste or with rent or with all sorts of other things. And there are some very simple metrics that you can use in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, effectiveness, and all sorts of other things.
But if it's difficult to get the waste data from our tenants, how do we get them to report on their What was the word?
I think I'm going to
let
the debate rage another day. So this is certainly one that will continue as part of the discussion. Doesn't end here today. So I want to thank our panel. Thank you very much indeed for sparking debate. I'd like you to thank them in the customary sense. And of course, thank all of you. I'm not going to try to sum up what was said today or try to conclude anything, partly because my brain isn't big enough to do that job anyway, but because there are no conclusions to today. It is the very start of this process. And you are all in this room because you, in your heads, hold very important information for this process going forward. So we will reach some conclusions, but they will be out of this room. And we would be very grateful for your continued support in this difficult process, in trying to identify what those next steps are, in trying to pragmatically progress those next steps now. I think one thing I will summarize is we heard that people see the potential for what this could do. And of course, that potential could be realized, or it could not be realized at all. And that is really down to the process from here on in and how involved you experts from the various member states across Europe, how involved you get with this process going forward. So thank you all for being so dedicated and involved so far, for sitting through. We really made you work very hard today. That was very cruel of us, but I feel like we got a huge wealth of useful information out of people. And we look forward to walking along the path together, taking those next steps. So thank you all for a long, exciting day full of learning. And we look forward to the process continuing. Thank you.